Snow drifted down like fine white dust over Cedar Ridge Airport, a small mountain town terminal tucked against the foothills of Colorado. Most mornings here moved in a soft, unhurried rhythm. Locals returning from family visits, retirees heading south for warmer weather, ranch hands flying in with worn canvas duffels. The kind of place where people nodded hello to strangers, and the quiet felt almost sacred. But this morning, the quiet shattered. Ranger, a black and tan German shepherd with the posture of a soldier and the eyes of an old soul, suddenly lunged forward, yanking his handler off balance. His bark tore through the concourse, sharp and echoing, hitting the vaulted glass ceiling like warning sirens. It wasn't the crisp, disciplined, alert bark of a trained K9. This was something raw, urgent, uncontrolled. Passengers froze. A woman clutched her tote bag. A grandfather held his trembling grandson close. A young man whispered into his phone, "Something's wrong. That's not normal." The crowd drifted back instinctively, like a tide pulled by fear. Luke Harlan tightened his grip on the leash, boots scraping across the polished floor as Ranger pulled harder, desperate. Luke had worked with this dog for nearly 2 years, long enough to know every signal, every breath. He had never heard Ranger bark like that, never seen him tremble this way. The dog's hackles stood like needles, teeth bared, not in aggression, but in something far worse. Fear. "Ranger, easy, buddy. Take it easy," Luke murmured. But the dog didn't ease. Instead, he barreled toward a gray, hard-shell suitcase rolling off the carousel, stopping at its edge as if guided by instinct older than training. Luke stepped in front of him, hands raised toward the gathering crowd. "Please step back. Don't crowd the area." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the same tone he used years ago as a firefighter on the edges of burning roofs. People listened to it. Ranger pressed his nose to the suitcase seam, whining low, then barked again, shorter, harsher, like something breaking inside him. Luke felt a ripple climb his spine. The suitcase sat motionless, almost ordinary in its dull metallic color. No tags, no stickers, no owner stepping forward. Just a silent, waiting shape. A TSA officer approached, voice unsteady. "That bag doesn't match any incoming flight manifest. It just appeared on the belt." The words had barely left his mouth when Ranger dropped to the ground, lying flat, chest pressed to the floor, paws reaching toward the suitcase. It was the signal. The unmistakable sign he used only when he sensed a living being in distress. Not explosives, not contraband. Something far more human. The concourse fell silent. Even the overhead announcement paused, as if the airport itself was holding its breath. Luke crouched beside him. The dog's body trembled, not with fear of danger, but fear of losing something. Luke knew that tremor. It lived in him too. "Ranger," he whispered, brushing the dog's shoulder. The shepherd lifted his head, eyes shimmering with urgency. then pawed the suitcase. Once, twice, each scrape echoing through the stillness. A woman gasped. "Oh God, is something alive in there?" Luke swallowed hard. Cold air drifted in through the automatic doors. Memories he tried to bury. Sirens, rubble, smoke. The moment he realized he couldn't save the woman he loved, flashed like ghosts. He pushed them down. "Lock down this aisle, now!" Security moved. Barriers slid shut. People backed away, whispering, worrying, fearing. But Luke didn't hear them. All he heard was Ranger's soft, aching whine. All he saw was the dog's gaze locked on that silent suitcase. And all he felt, deep in that hollow place carved by grief, was certainty. Whatever was inside that suitcase, it wasn't an object. It was a life. And it was running out of time. Outside the airport's wide glass walls, the Rockies stretched beneath a pale morning sky, their snowy ridges catching the faint silver glow of the rising sun. Inside, the terminal lights cast long reflections across the floor, sterile, steady, indifferent. But Luke Harlan felt anything but steady. Ranger's frantic behavior had stirred something buried in him, something he had tried to forget for nearly 3 years. He stepped back from the barricade as other officers moved in, giving Ranger space while still keeping travelers at a safe distance. The echoes of the shepherd's desperate barks still vibrated in Luke's chest, even though Ranger had quieted to a trembling sit. Eyes locked on the suitcase as if watching a fragile heartbeat fade. Luke exhaled slowly. The air tasted of recycled ventilation and cold metal, familiar, but never comforting. His hand brushed the edge of his badge, not out of pride but out of habit. The kind of unconscious motion a man makes when he's trying not to remember. He walked toward the far window, needing space before the next wave of protocol swept in. The glass was chilled. When his palm met it, the cold seeped into his skin, grounding him. For a moment, he let the snowy silence outside fill the noise inside his mind. 3 years ago, he had stood in front of a very different kind of glass. Hospital glass. Fogged by frantic breaths and the heat of chaos. He had watched flames swallow the collapsed structure where his wife had been trapped beneath debris. As a firefighter, he knew every second mattered. As a husband, every second hurt. They never pulled her out alive. And Luke had never forgiven himself for being on the wrong side of that glass. He wasn't a firefighter anymore. He wasn't the man who believed he could save people. But he stayed in public service, K-9 security, because it was the only way he knew to stay close to the part of himself that hadn't died. Ranger had become that part, that one piece of light, level moderate, that refused to go out. Behind him, Ranger let out a soft, low woof, almost a question. Luke turned, meeting the dog's eyes. The shepherd stood alert, tail stiff. But there was something else in his posture now. Worry. Worry felt when a life hangs in the balance. Luke recognized it. He'd lived with it. "All right," Luke murmured, stepping back toward the quarantine area. "I'm here, bud. I hear you." A TSA supervisor approached. "Officer Harlan, we've initiated a Level 2 lockdown. Emergency services are on standby. We'll treat this as a travel safety incident until proven otherwise." Luke nodded. "What about baggage logs?" "Already running them. But that suitcase, it's not in our system. No check-in, no tag scans." Luke's jaw tightened. Someone wanted it to disappear. Ranger shifted, nose lifting toward the suitcase again. Body tense as a bowstring pulled taut. Luke crouched beside him, laying a steadying hand on the dog's back. Ranger wasn't shaking anymore, but the stillness was almost worse. It was the same quiet rescue dogs carried right before they found survivors, or bodies. "You're telling me something," Luke whispered. "I need to listen." A cluster of travelers watched from behind the rope barrier. An older woman crossed herself. A man muttered into his phone about airport security protocols. A teenage girl whispered, "Something's alive in there. I just know it." Luke rose, a decision forming inside him like a spark. "We open it," he said. "Protocol requires bomb squad clearance," the supervisor replied. "This isn't a bomb," Luke said firmly. "If it were, Ranger wouldn't be acting like this." The shepherd's ears were pinned back, tail low, eyes wide with something close to grief. The supervisor hesitated. Luke pressed on. "If there's a life in that suitcase, even a small one, every second counts. We need to move." Ranger let out a small bark, sharp, insistent, but not frantic. Luke recognized it instantly. A location bark, a confirmation. The supervisor's face tightened. Then he nodded. "All right, Harlan. We'll move it to the isolation room. You're supervising." Luke exhaled, a breath that trembled more than he liked. He gave Ranger a quick scratch between the shoulders. "Okay, partner. Lead the way." They guided Ranger and the gray suitcase toward the restricted hallway. Passengers parted like water around a stone. The hum of the airport dimmed, the world narrowing to a single object rolling across the floor, and the shepherd walking beside it, alert to every movement. Luke walked slightly behind Ranger, eyes shifting between the dog's body language and the suitcase that seemed suddenly heavier than its size. He felt it again. The same hum of fear he'd felt years ago before stepping into burning ruins. Only this time, he wasn't stepping in alone. Ranger was with him, and Ranger was right. Something in that suitcase was alive, and whatever it was, it needed them. The isolation hallway of Cedar Ridge Airport was far quieter than the bustling terminal. A long strip of polished floor lit by overhead bulbs that buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow. As Luke walked alongside the security team transporting the gray suitcase, he noticed how Ranger stayed glued to its side, not barking now, not whining, just watching. Every few steps, the shepherd lowered his head to sniff the seam again, as if confirming the life inside hadn't slipped away. The farther they walked, the colder the air felt. Not physically colder, but a different kind of chill, like the space carried the weight of whatever secrets people hoped would never surface in an airport. Travelers thought of luggage as an extension of themselves. When a suitcase appeared without an owner, It was like a ghost wandering into a place built for the living. Luke kept his hands steady, but his mind was working fast. The supervisor beside him was already moving through security protocol, contacting emergency services, arranging medics, following procedures. Everything was happening the way the manual said it should. But nothing about this felt like a procedure. It felt personal. It felt like standing on the edge of something fragile and irreversible. When they reached the door to the isolation chamber, a TSA agent punched in a code. The lock beeped, disengaged, and the heavy door opened with a sigh that echoed down the hallway. The room inside was small, windowless, and quiet. Walls designed to contain danger, but today, they were holding a mystery instead. The suitcase was placed gently in the center of the room. Ranger stepped toward it immediately, tail stiff, ears forward. Luke felt a pull inside his chest, something between dread and responsibility. He'd always believed a suitcase was just a suitcase, until moments like this reminded him that even ordinary objects could carry the weight of a human life. "All right," the supervisor said softly. "Let's scan it one more time before opening." An officer lifted a handheld analyzer, passing it slowly around the suitcase. The screen flickered. No explosives, no chemicals, nothing harmful. But Luke wasn't reassured. Ranger's body language said everything the machines couldn't. When the scan finished, Ranger pressed his paw against the case. One long, trembling scrape. Luke stepped closer. "Okay, bud," he murmured. "We're here. Just hang on." The supervisor looked at Luke. "If we open it, you're taking point, Harlan." Luke nodded. "I know." He crouched beside the suitcase, resting his hand on the lid. Not to open it yet, but to feel. A subtle warmth radiated beneath the surface, far too warm for an object left alone in an airport. Luke's breath hitched. A flicker of memory, smoke, rubble, a collapsing ceiling pushed at the back of his mind. He pushed it away. "This thing shouldn't be warm," one agent muttered. Luke replied quietly, "It isn't a thing. It's someone." A few officers exchanged glances. Ranger lowered his body again, head between his paws. The posture of a dog, waiting for a verdict. Luke moved his fingers to the zipper. "Let's open it." The room went silent. Even the buzzing overhead lights seemed to fade. The zipper pull was small, delicate, out of place on a suitcase that suddenly felt heavier than anything Luke had ever lifted. He tugged. The first sound was soft, fabric parting. The interior was dark, too dark. A faint scent escaped. Cotton, cold air, and something else. Something that hit Luke in the chest like a memory. Something like fear. He opened the lid fully. At first, he couldn't breathe. Nestled inside, wrapped tightly in a faded pink blanket, was a little girl, maybe 3 years old, maybe younger. Her hair fell in soft curls across her forehead. Her cheeks were pale as winter light. Her lips cracked. Her hands curled into tiny fists, as if she'd fought sleep for as long as she could. For a moment, the room froze. Then Ranger inched forward and let out a long, trembling cry. Luke leaned in fast, placing 2 fingers near her nose. The air escaping her was thin, fragile, but it was there. "She's alive!" he choked out. Relief rippled through the room, but it wasn't relief that filled Luke. It was something deeper, something raw. He scooped the child into his arms, careful not to shake her. She was weightless, like holding a memory. Officers rushed to call medics. Someone cleared the path. Ranger stayed close, walking beside Luke, guarding both man and child. As Luke stepped into the corridor, the fluorescent lights felt too bright, the world too sharp. He looked down at the little girl, her lashes fluttering weakly, and felt a truth he didn't dare voice. He could not lose another life. Not today. The isolation room door swung shut behind them with a heavy thud, sealing Luke, Ranger, and the small security team inside a box of white walls and humming vents. The overhead lights flickered once before stabilizing, casting a cold, unforgiving glow over everything. The metal table, the oxygen kit, the faint scuffs on the floor left by other emergencies far less personal than this. Luke felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders like freshly fallen snow. Heavy, silent, dangerous. The little girl lay in his arms, wrapped in the pink blanket that had kept her warm just long enough. Her breath was shallow, so faint he had to watch her chest to be sure it was still happening at all. Ranger paced in a slow, tight circle, claws whispering against tile. His ears twitched at every sound, as if the universe had narrowed down to this child and this moment. A paramedic slipped inside, young, red-haired, with the steady hands of someone used to emergencies. "Let me take her," he said softly, as though afraid volume alone might break something fragile. Luke hesitated, just for a heartbeat, before surrendering the child. His arms resisted the motion, as if they'd already memorized her weight. Ranger moved beside the medic immediately, sniffing the air near the girl, whining in small, broken tones. Luke noticed the dog's tail pressed close to his body, nervous, protective. "She's dehydrated, body temp dangerously low," the medic murmured, placing a small oxygen mask near her mouth. "We need to move her to the ER now." No one argued. The room surged into motion. As the medic lifted her onto the gurney, Luke instinctively reached out, steadying her head, adjusting her blanket, doing anything except watching her slip away from his care. He'd failed before, once, unforgivably, but he couldn't let it happen again. Not even to a child he'd never met. "You coming with us?" the medic asked. Luke didn't answer. Ranger did. The shepherd barked, short, sharp, then planted himself beside the gurney. Luke nodded. "We go with her." The hallway outside was colder, wider, filled with echoes of distant announcements. As they pushed the gurney through, passengers stared, some with horror, some with pity, some with that strange curiosity people carry during crisis. Phones lowered. Conversations stopped. A ripple of silence passed through the crowd like a wave. One woman placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "Bless that child." Another murmured about airport safety. Someone whispered, "Kidnapping." Someone else said, "Human trafficking." Speculation ran faster than compassion, and Luke felt a flicker of anger at that truth. Ranger stayed tight to Luke's side, glancing back at the suitcase behind the barricade. The dog's eyes narrowed, not in aggression, but in recognition. To him, that metal box wasn't luggage anymore. It was a threat that almost won. Luke placed a hand on Ranger's head. "Good work. You found her in time." For the first time since the chaos began, Ranger looked up, not proud, not relieved, just tired. The gurney entered the ambulance bay. Cold wind swept in, carrying pine, diesel, and winter. As the doors opened, the medic climbed inside, adjusting monitors and warming blankets. Luke helped lift the child into the ambulance. Ranger attempted to jump in after him, but hesitated at Luke's signal. "Stay," Luke said gently. Ranger obeyed, though every muscle in his body trembled. Before stepping inside, Luke looked back down the dim hallway, toward the isolation room, toward the suitcase, toward all the unanswered questions waiting for him. Something in that hallway felt heavier than a crime. He felt it in his chest, the same way he once felt smoke pressing against his lungs. This wasn't random. Someone had put a child into a suitcase and walked away. That truth chilled him more deeply than any Colorado winter. Luke climbed into the ambulance. Ranger sprinted toward the driver's side, refusing to be left behind. The doors slammed shut. The siren ignited like a scream, and as the ambulance shot into the frosty morning, Luke felt the familiar ache of a prayer he no longer believed in, rising uninvited inside him. Let her live. Please, let her live. The ambulance jolted as it sped through the icy Colorado streets, chains on the tires clinking against frozen asphalt. Luke held onto the rail above him, watching the tiny rise and fall of the girl's chest beneath the warming blankets. Her breaths were shallow and uneven, each one sounding like it might be the last. Ranger sat wedged between the seats, paws braced, eyes fixed on the child, as if he could will her to stay alive. Inside the vehicle, the lights cast a dim red glow across their faces, soft but urgent, like a heartbeat pulsing against the cold. The paramedic adjusted the oxygen mask, speaking gently. "Come on, sweetheart. Breathe for me." His tone was steady, practiced, the voice of someone used to saving strangers and pretending it doesn't hurt. Luke had heard words like that before, in another life, in a burning home where hope evaporated into smoke. The memory pressed at the edges of his mind, but he locked it away. This wasn't the past. This child still had a chance. "What do you think?" Luke asked quietly. The medic glanced up. "Her vitals are unstable, severe dehydration, possible hypothermia. We'll know more after evaluation. Then softer. But she's fighting. Luke nodded. Fighting mattered. Fighting meant there was something left to save. Ranger whined suddenly, pressing his head against Luke's knee. Luke placed a hand on the dog's neck, grounding both of them. The ambulance turned sharply, and the girl's eyelids fluttered. Luke leaned forward, pulse spiking. Her lashes trembled again, barely noticeable, like the last leaf on a winter branch. "Hey," Luke whispered. "You're safe now. We've got you." Her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. So small, so fragile. Luke felt his heart tighten like a fist. For a moment he saw the curve of his wife's hand. Delicate, capable, gone too soon. He blinked hard, dispelling the image. This wasn't about grief. This was about giving the girl the future someone tried to steal. The medic nodded toward the gray suitcase secured in the corner. "Security's gonna want photos. Bag like that. No tag, no ID. Whoever did this didn't want her found." Luke's jaw tightened. Or didn't care if she was found too late. The medic didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Outside, the ambulance slid through traffic, lights flashing across snow-covered shops and waking diners. People heading to work had no idea that a child, someone's entire world, had been tucked inside a suitcase like forgotten luggage. Luke thought of safety laws, trauma support, and how thin protection was when the wrong person made the wrong choice. Ranger nudged Luke again. A reminder. A grounding force. Luke exhaled slowly, nodding. "Yeah, I know. Stay with her." The medic leaned closer to the child. "If she's got family, they'll need to be notified. And whoever did this, they're probably not far. People don't just vanish into thin air." Luke stared at the girl's pale face. "We'll find them." He said it not with anger, but with something heavier. Responsibility. When the ambulance finally reached Cedar Ridge Medical Center, nurses rushed out, pushing through the cold morning like a wave of purpose. The doors flew open. The medic handed the girl off seamlessly, rattling off vitals. The team swept her into the hospital, disappearing behind swinging double doors and bright lights. Luke stepped out of the ambulance just as Ranger hopped down, shaking off the cold. The dog fell into step beside him, as if neither could move without the other. At the hospital entrance, Luke paused. The girl was gone behind doors he couldn't follow. Snow gathered on his jacket. The world felt too still. Ranger nudged his hand gently, reminding him that silence, too, could be part of protection. Luke whispered, "Whoever put her in, that suitcase, they left something behind. Not evidence, not fingerprints, but intent. And intent always leads to truth." He turned toward the officer approaching from the parking lot, ready to begin the next part of the nightmare no one had prepared him for. The automatic doors of Cedar Ridge Medical Center opened with a gust of cold air. As Luke and Ranger stepped inside, their breath mingling with the sterile hospital atmosphere, everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and winter coats thawing in the lobby. The world inside moved fast, nurses pushing carts, phones ringing, announcements crackling. But for Luke, time dragged like heavy boots through deep snow. Down the hall, the little girl, still without a name, still barely clinging to consciousness, was rushed into a trauma room. A nurse shouted vitals. A doctor asked about the timeline. A specialist rolled in a portable heater. It was an orchestra of urgency, each motion precise and necessary. Luke watched through the glass, unable to look away. Ranger nudged Luke's knee, sensing the tension vibrating through him. The dog's eyes were alert, but softer now, as if he understood this part was beyond his paws. Even so, he refused to lie down. He stood guard, chest rising in short, steady breaths, eyes fixed on the trauma room door. A doctor approached. "You're the officer who found her?" Luke nodded once. "You may have saved this child's life. Another hour, maybe less. She wouldn't have survived." Luke swallowed hard. "She's stable?" "For now," the doctor replied. "Dehydration, hypothermia, possible emotional trauma. Children are resilient. She has a chance." A chance. Luke held on to those words the way he once held burning beams, knuckles white, refusing to let go. "We'll need to notify child services, law enforcement, trauma support, and search for her guardian," the doctor added. "A missing child report may already be circulating." Airport security entered the lobby, carrying folders and a metallic evidence box containing the gray suitcase. Even from across the room, Ranger let out a low growl, recognizing the object that had nearly become a tomb. One agent set it down gently, as if it were still alive. Luke approached. "Any ID? Passenger logs? Surveillance?" The supervisor shook his head. "No tags, no ownership. Someone rolled it onto the conveyor and walked away. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." One word burned at the edges of Luke's thoughts. Intentional. A child delivered into a public place, hidden in plain sight. Left to chance. Left to die if not for a dog's instinct. The idea scratched at him, refusing to settle, stirring the same urgency he'd felt entering burning homes years ago. Not fear for himself, fear for someone else. A nurse stepped out. "Officer Harlan?" "Yes?" She made a sound, a small one. "We're warming her up and giving fluids. She's not out of danger, but she's responding. If you'd like to see her, you can, just for a moment." Luke exhaled, a breath scraping against old scars. He motioned for Ranger to follow. The little girl lay wrapped in layers of blankets, tiny fingers curled near her chin, her breathing steadier now, though still faint. A nurse had placed a stuffed bear beside her, softening the cold room. Her eyelashes fluttered, drifting between worlds. Ranger stepped closer, resting his chin on the bed frame, gentler than Luke had ever seen him. The shepherd's eyes softened to amber glass, reflecting each fragile rise and fall of her chest. Luke stood beside them, hands in his pockets, wishing the simple act of standing here could undo what someone had done to her. "Hang in there," he murmured. His voice barely disturbed the machines, or Ranger, or the child who fought to survive. Each small breath she took felt like a promise that this story wasn't finished. And for the first time in years, Luke felt something stir inside him. Hope. The quiet moment didn't last. Another officer approached. "Luke, we found something on the footage." He hesitated. "You're going to want to see this." Luke nodded, giving Ranger a signal. The shepherd didn't move at first, torn between the child and the call of duty. "Come on, boy," Luke whispered. Ranger finally stepped back, eyes lingering on the girl until the door closed behind them. Whatever was waiting on that footage, it wasn't going to be simple, and Luke had the feeling this was only the beginning. The waiting room outside the pediatric wing carried a hushed, suspended feeling, like time itself was holding its breath. Snow tapped softly against the long windows, blurring the mountains beyond. Chairs lined neatly, overhead lights humming in their quiet, colorless way. Luke stood near the wall, arms folded, eyes tracking the steady movement of nurses passing by. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting between his paws, watching everything with alert, patient eyes. Luke didn't know how long they'd been there. 5 minutes, maybe 20, long enough for his thoughts to spiral through everything that had happened since the suitcase was unzipped. Long enough for the silence to grow heavy. Then the elevator dinged. Luke didn't look up at first. Hospitals were never still. But Ranger's ears perked sharply, his body rising from the floor in one swift motion. His gaze locked on the elevator doors, posture rigid, expectant. This wasn't random. The doors slid open. A woman stumbled out, nearly losing her footing. Early 20s, maybe late 20s. Wind-blown hair, a face drained of color, her coat half-buttoned, snow clinging to the sleeves. She clutched a crumpled photograph in one shaking hand. Her eyes scanned the room with frantic hope, the kind born in darkness, looking for a single flicker of light. "Ava Miller?" a nurse called cautiously. The woman nodded, gasping. My daughter. I got a call. Someone found. Is she here? Please tell me she's here." Her voice cracked apart mid-sentence, held together only by desperation. Ranger stepped forward, tail low, drawn to the gravity of a mother's fear. A nurse approached Ava gently. "We believe we recovered your child. She's receiving treatment. She's alive." Ava's knees buckled. The nurse caught her before she fell. She covered her face, shoulders shaking with sobs torn from someplace raw. When she looked up, her eyes found Luke. "You're the one who found her," she whispered. "Were you there when they opened the suitcase?" Luke inhaled, steadying his voice. "Yes. Ranger alerted us. If he hadn't, she wouldn't have made it in time." Ava pressed the photo to her chest. "Ellie. Her name is Ellie." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I thought I lost her forever." The rawness in her voice hit Luke harder than expected. For a moment he saw himself in her, saw the echo of losing someone he couldn't save. Ranger stepped closer to Ava, sniffing gently at her hand. She dropped to her knees, fingers sinking into his fur, like he was the only solid thing left in her world. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding my little girl." Ranger leaned into her touch. Quiet, steady. He didn't need training for this. He simply understood. A doctor stepped into the hallway. "Ms. Miller?" Ava rose so fast she nearly stumbled. "Is she awake? Can I see her?" "She's stable for now," the doctor replied, "still recovering from hypothermia and dehydration. But she responded to treatment. She's fighting." Ava pressed a hand to her mouth, sobbing through a trembling smile. "That's my girl." "You can see her briefly," the doctor added. "Keep it calm. She's fragile." Ava followed the doctor down the hallway, moving like someone walking through both heaven and hell at the same time. Luke stayed behind, Ranger at his heel, watching her disappear behind the door where Ellie lay. When the door closed, Luke felt something shift inside him. Not pain, not relief, something between the two. A reminder, a wound, a promise. Ranger nudged his hand gently, grounding him. "Yeah," Luke whispered. "I know." Behind the closed door, a mother reunited with her daughter. But in the hallway, Luke and Ranger understood the truth. Finding the child was only the beginning. Time 700. Finding who put her in that suitcase, that was the real storm still waiting. The security operations room at Cedar Ridge Airport felt like a different world compared to the quiet corridors of the hospital. Dim lights glowed off rows of monitors, capturing every corner of the terminal, every check-in counter, every baggage lane, every passing shadow. The low hum of equipment created an ever-present tension, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Luke entered with Ranger at his side, their footsteps muffled by the industrial carpet. His face still carried the weight of the hospital, but now something sharper edged into his expression. Purpose, determination, a need for answers, burning ever since Ava whispered her daughter's name. A TSA analyst motioned them over. "We isolated the baggage footage," she said, fingers flying over the keyboard. "This is from the conveyor lane where the suitcase appeared." Ranger sat at Luke's heel, tail low, ears angled toward the screens. The scent of cold electronics didn't bother him, but the sight of the suitcase on the monitor did. The analyst hit play, footage flickered to life, showing the baggage drop 15 minutes before Ranger alerted. People moved casually, rolling suitcases, chatting, adjusting jackets. Nothing stood out. Until a figure entered from the left side of the frame. A woman, hood up, shoulders hunched, moving like someone trying not to be seen, yet too frantic to appear natural. "Zoom," Luke said quietly. The image sharpened. A young woman in her early 20s wearing a baggy sweatshirt and gloves, despite being indoors. She carried the gray suitcase with both hands, not like luggage, like something breakable or someone. She's treating it like a child, the analyst murmured. A second angle appeared, showing her setting the suitcase onto the belt. Her movements were careful, hesitant, too gentle. When she stepped back, she looked over her shoulder, once toward the cameras, once toward the crowd. Luke felt cold anger rising in him, steady, lethal, the kind born from witnessing something unforgivable. "Run facial recognition," he said. "It might not be clear. Run it." The analyst complied. A moment later, a profile appeared beside the footage. Lauren Finch, 26, preschool teacher, no criminal record, a woman trusted with children, gentle, nurturing, described as someone who loved kids like her own. Ava's babysitter. Luke closed his eyes briefly. Realization washed through him like ice water. The analyst added softly, "She checked in yesterday for an early shift. No signs of distress. But she never arrived." Luke stared at Lauren's photo. Soft features, faint smile, a face easily trusted by any parent. "What happened to her?" he murmured. "What made her do this?" Ranger let out a low, uneasy rumble, recognizing something wrong in the air. "There's more," a second analyst said. "After dropping the suitcase, she didn't go to security or leave the terminal. Watch." Footage shifted again. Lauren walked away from the conveyor, weaving through the crowd. Then, just before the next camera angle, she slipped into a small maintenance alcove and never reappeared. "She knew the blind spot," the analyst said. "Most people never notice it exists." Luke frowned. "You're saying she planned this?" "Or she was desperate," another agent offered. Desperate. Luke knew that word too well. Desperation twisted people, turned fear into recklessness, pain into harm. "We need to find her," Luke said finally. "She could be a danger to herself or others." "And she might try to take Ellie again," an agent added. Ranger rose suddenly, tail flicking. He pressed his nose toward the monitor. When Lauren turned her head, just for a fraction of a second, Ranger stiffened. He remembered her scent. Luke crouched beside him. "That's right, boy. You know who she is." The supervisor approached with a printout. "We notified Child Services. Full investigation is underway. But now we need everything the mother can tell us. Lauren may have had contact with her." Luke took the paper, jaw tightening. "Ava needs time to breathe." "She might not have it," the supervisor replied. Luke didn't argue. He turned to Ranger, the dog watching him with steady, unwavering eyes. "Let's go," he said softly. Together, they walked out of the surveillance room. Behind them, Lauren Finch's frozen image lingered on the screen. A woman trusted with a child's life, now responsible for placing that child into a suitcase and abandoning her to chance. And that betrayal would ignite everything that came next. By the time Luke and Ranger stepped into the cold night air outside Cedar Ridge Medical Center, the snowfall had thickened. Flakes drifted downward in slow spirals, glowing under the hospital's lights before disappearing into the dark. The world felt quieter out here. too quiet for what they were about to do. Lauren Finch was somewhere in this town, and she wasn't running from guilt. She was running from loss, the dangerous kind that could twist a person into something unpredictable. A patrol car pulled up, tires crunching against ice. Officer Grant rolled down the window. "We've got units checking the bus depot, the train station, and the motels. No sign of her yet." Luke nodded, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. "She won't use public transport. She knows the blind spots in the airport. She'll know the ones in town, too." Grant sighed, breath clouding the air. "So where do we start?" Luke looked down at Ranger, the shepherd already sniffing the wind, alert and focused. He wasn't searching randomly. He was waiting. "Start with him," Luke said. Inside the hospital lobby, a nurse handed them the faded pink blanket Ellie had been found in. "This is all we can spare," she said softly. Ranger pressed his nose into the fabric, inhaled deeply, then lifted his head with absolute certainty. He had her scent. The search began. Ranger led Luke across the icy parking lot, paws steady despite the slick ground. Snow gathered along his fur as he moved with purpose, following Ellie's scent toward the darker edges of the lot. Grant followed closely. Why would Lauren leave the airport but stay in town? Why not drive out? Luke didn't slow. Because she didn't plan that far. Whatever she did, it wasn't long-term. She panicked. Grant muttered, "People don't panic by putting a child in a suitcase." Luke answered quietly, "You'd be surprised what panic looks like when grief gets inside it." Ranger suddenly veered left, pulling the leash taut. Luke followed, breath fogging the air. They approached a line of old service buildings, storage rooms, maintenance sheds, places forgotten by most of the town. Ranger stopped at a narrow alley between two buildings. His body stiffened, ears high, tail lifting just slightly. Luke raised a hand, signaling Grant to stay quiet. The shepherd stepped deeper into the alley, nose scanning the cold air. At the bottom of a set of concrete steps, leading to a half-buried maintenance door, he growled low. "You smell her, boy?" Luke whispered. Ranger's growl deepened. Grant whispered, "You think she's in there?" Luke studied the door. Rusted handle, fresh footprints in the snow, a faint smear on the knob. Someone touched it recently. "She was," Luke said. "Maybe she still is." Ranger barked once, sharp, certain, then sat, his signal of confirmation. His breath fogged the cold air, tail sweeping the frozen ground. Luke tried the handle. Locked. Grant radioed dispatch. "Need a unit to the East Maintenance Buildings. Possible suspect location." While they waited, Luke crouched beside Ranger. The dog's eyes never left the door. "You did good, partner," Luke said softly. Ranger leaned into the touch, but only for a moment. Duty pulled him forward again. Luke's mind churned. If Lauren had hidden here, she wasn't fleeing justice. She was fleeing reality. He'd seen it before. People who lost someone didn't always break loudly. Sometimes they broke quietly, slipping into shadows until the world felt like something they had to hide from. A patrol unit arrived, lights flashing faintly in the snowy dark. Officers prepared tools for breaching. Ranger stepped back, tail twitching. Not in fear, but anticipation. Luke stood beside him. The officers lifted the ram. The night held its breath. Then, crash! The door splintered inward. Ranger lunged forward, barking, "Time 400 mums." But the room was empty. Just a scattering of blankets, a half-eaten granola bar, a crumpled photograph of Ellie. Grant whispered, "She was here, minutes ago." Luke picked up the photo, snow melting across its glossy surface. Ranger lowered his head, sniffing the air again. They weren't done, not even close. Snow blew hard across the outskirts of Cedar Ridge as Luke and the team followed Ranger deeper into the industrial district, where old rail lines and shuttered warehouses sat like forgotten bones. The wind carried the metallic scent of rust and winter, and somewhere in the distance, a freight train wailed, a long, mournful sound echoing across the valley like a warning. Ranger stayed ahead of the group, nose low, steps confident. His body language was different now, focused, cautious. This was no longer just scent tracking. This was closing in on something volatile, something human. Luke felt it too, a heaviness in the air, a tension like the moment before a beam collapses in a burning house. Officer Grant kept glancing around, hand near his holster. "She's close," Luke murmured. Ranger's tail is down. He's sensing instability. "Instability?" Grant muttered. "She stuffed a child in a suitcase. I'd say that qualifies." Luke didn't respond. His jaw tightened. Ranger led them past a broken fence, across a stretch of frozen ground, toward an old freight depot. Paint peeling, windows cracked, its large sliding doors half open, as if breathing cold air in and out. Ranger growled softly. "She's in there," Luke said quietly. Grant signaled 2 officers. They fanned out, forming a perimeter. Luke approached the open doorway slowly. Ranger pressed against his leg. Inside, the depot was dark, lit only by moonlight slipping through shattered skylights. Dust floated in the air like ghostly ash. Then, a voice broke the silence. "Don't come any closer." It was soft, cracked, scared. A woman's voice. Lauren Finch stepped out from behind a rusted cargo crate, hands trembling. Her hood was pulled back now, revealing tangled hair and tear-streaked cheeks. She looked small, like someone who'd been running not from the police, but from herself. Luke raised his hand slowly. "Lauren, my name is Officer Harlan. No one here wants to hurt you." She shook her head violently. "You shouldn't have come. You don't understand." Her hands clutched a worn backpack. Ellie's backpack. Ranger barked once. Sharp, controlled. Lauren flinched. Luke spoke softly, the way he'd spoken to victims trapped in burning homes long ago. "We're not here to judge you. We just need to understand what happened." Lauren backed against the crate. Her eyes were wild, painfully fragile, like they could shatter under the smallest pressure. "I loved that little girl," she whispered. "More than anything. I took care of her. I held her when she cried. I was there when her mother wasn't." Luke kept his voice even. "Ava trusted you." Lauren's voice cracked. "That's the problem. She trusted me, but she didn't understand Ellie. Not like I did." Grant muttered under his breath. Luke shot him a warning look. "Lauren," Luke said quietly, stepping forward an inch. "Whatever you were feeling, whatever you thought you needed to do, Ellie didn't deserve what happened." Lauren shook her head, gripping the backpack tighter. "I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to save her." Luke let the word hang in the cold air. Save her? From what? Lauren's eyes flickered. Grief, guilt, confusion swirling underneath. From being abandoned. From being forgotten. From becoming like my sister. Luke froze. "Your sister?" Her voice dimmed to a fragile whisper. "She died when she was Ellie's age. I couldn't save her. I thought if I kept Ellie with me, she'd be safe." Luke exhaled slowly. This wasn't malice. It was trauma. Unaddressed, untreated, spiraling into desperation. "Lauren," he said softly, "Ellie doesn't need saving from her mother. She needs her mother. She needs help, and so do you." Tears streamed down Lauren's face. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." "That's why we're here," Luke answered. "This is your chance to do the right thing." Ranger stepped forward slowly, head low, ears relaxed. Not a threat, an invitation. Lauren stared at him, breath trembling. Then her legs gave out. She slid down the crate, sobbing into her hands. The backpack dropped beside her. Luke approached cautiously. He knelt in front of her. "It's over," he said softly. "Let us help you." Lauren nodded through tears, surrendering without resistance. Grant stepped forward to take her into custody. Ranger pressed his head against Luke's knee, sensing the tension easing from his partner's shoulders. Luke scratched behind his ear gently. "It's done," Luke murmured. "Let's get her back where she needs to be." But as they escorted Lauren out into the snow, Luke felt one truth settle heavily in his chest. The damage had already been done. Not just to Ellie, but to everyone who ever trusted Lauren Finch. And the ripple of that betrayal was only beginning. The pediatric recovery room was bathed in a soft golden glow, the kind hospitals use to make night feel a little less lonely. Machines hummed quietly, their steady rhythms filling the space like a fragile promise. Ellie lay on the narrow hospital bed, bundled in blankets that looked too heavy for her tiny frame. Her tangled hair rose and fell with each faint breath. Ava sat beside her, hands clasped tightly around the small fingers resting atop the blanket. She whispered something only Ellie could hear. Words soaked in relief and fear, gratitude and guilt. Her shoulders trembled, as though her body was still trying to catch up to the reality that her daughter was alive. Luke stood in the doorway with Ranger, watching in silence. He didn't want to intrude. This moment belonged to a mother and her child. But the doctor had insisted he come. Said Ellie responded differently when Ranger was near. Said the dog's presence steadied her vitals, quieted her panic. Ava turned and saw them. Her expression softened, cracked, but grateful. "Come in," she whispered. Luke stepped inside, Ranger padding quietly beside him. The shepherd's claws tapped lightly against the polished floor, but his posture was gentle, tail low, eyes warm. He knew the difference between chasing a suspect and approaching someone who had already survived too much. Ava brushed a strand of hair from Ellie's forehead. "She's been stirring on and off," she said softly. "The doctors say it's a good sign. They said she's fighting." Luke swallowed. "She's strong." Ava's faint smile wavered. "She has to be. She's all I have." Something flickered behind Luke's eyes. Pain. Memory. The cold echo of a fire he never escaped. He looked away. Ranger moved first. He walked to Ellie's bedside, lifted his nose gently, and nudged the bed rail as if asking permission. Ava nodded. "It's okay, boy. She knows you saved her." Ranger lowered his head, warm breath brushing against Ellie's fingers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, her fingers twitched. Ava gasped, covering her mouth. Luke felt the air shift, the room tilting towards something fragile and miraculous. Ranger nudged her hand again, slow, careful, coaxing a heartbeat out of hiding. Ellie's eyelids fluttered. Her tiny voice, hoarse and barely audible, broke through the quiet. "Doggy." A tear slid down Ava's cheek. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "The doggy's here. He's been right here the whole time." Luke's throat tightened. Ranger let out a soft, breathy rumble, half greeting, half relief. Ellie's eyes opened just a fraction, searching, until they found Ranger. Her small fingers curled into his fur. And in that moment, nothing else existed. Not the depot, not the fear, not the betrayal. Just a child clinging to the one creature she recognized through her terror. Ava stroked her daughter's cheek. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No one's going to hurt you again." Ellie blinked slowly, the effort exhausting her. "Mommy?" Ava melted into tears. "Right here," she breathed. "Mommy's right here." Luke turned away, giving them space. But emotion still radiated through him, tearing quietly at the walls around his own loss. He rubbed Ranger's head gently. "You did good." A nurse entered softly, checking monitors. "Her readings are stabilizing," she said. "She'll need trauma care, therapy, but she's responding better than expected." Ava nodded, clutching Ellie's hand. "Whatever it takes. I don't care what it costs. I just want her to heal." Luke stayed quiet. He knew healing wasn't linear. He knew it better than most. Ellie drifted back to sleep, fingers still tangled in Ranger's fur. The room softened again, settling into a fragile peace. When Luke and Ranger stepped out into the hallway, Ava followed. "Officer Harlan," she called softly. He turned. Why did you stay? She asked. You could have left after bringing her here. Luke looked down at Ranger, the shepherd gazing up at him with those deep, knowing eyes. The interview room at Cedar Ridge Police Department was small and unadorned, lit by a single overhead lamp that cast soft shadows along the walls. Luke sat at the table with a notebook he wasn't writing in. Ranger curled quietly at his feet. The room wasn't meant to intimidate. It was meant to calm. But grief did not calm easily, and trauma did not loosen its grip just because someone turned down the lights. Across from him sat a forensic counselor specializing in child and family trauma. Dr. Monroe, a woman in her 50s with calm gray eyes and a way of speaking that made the world seem a little more patient. She reviewed her notes, then looked up. Ellie's stable physically, but emotionally. She paused. She's holding on to something she's afraid to let go. Luke nodded, though his chest tightened. He had seen fear in survivors before, fear that didn't scream, but whispered. Ranger lifted his head, ears flicking, as if he understood the weight of the words. Dr. Monroe continued. In her brief moments awake, Ellie mentioned a dark place and someone telling her to be quiet or Mommy won't find you. Her voice softened. She wasn't making it up. Luke's hands tightened on the notebook. Lauren? That's our assumption, Dr. Monroe replied gently. Her behavior matches someone spiraling through untreated grief. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains the emotional fracture. Luke exhaled slowly, running a finger across the notebook's blank page. She saw Ellie as a replacement for her sister. Yes, the doctor said, but that kind of projection is dangerous without support. Lauren was drowning, and instead of reaching for a life preserver, she pulled someone else under with her. Ranger let out a soft whine, a sound almost too human. Dr. Monroe smiled faintly at him. That dog has remarkable intuition. Ellie responds to him better than anyone else. If we continue trauma therapy, I'd like Ranger present. His presence lowers her anxiety markers significantly. Luke placed a gentle hand on Ranger's back. He'd stay with her all night if we allowed it. The doctor nodded. Consider it. It may help her heal. Silence settled again, the soft hum of the air vent filling the room. Then the door opened. Ava stepped in, pale, eyes red from crying. She sank into the chair beside Luke, clutching a tissue in trembling hands. I still don't understand, she whispered. Lauren loved Ellie. She sent me photos every day. She taught her songs. How does someone you trust just snap? Luke could see the guilt gathering behind her eyes. That corrosive question survivors always asked. What did I miss? He spoke gently. Ava, Lauren's decisions weren't caused by something you did. People break in ways we can't see. Sometimes they hide their pain until it takes over. Ava wiped her cheeks. But I left my daughter with her. I didn't know. God, I didn't know she was grieving her sister like that. That grief didn't belong to you, Luke said softly. It wasn't yours to fix, and it wasn't Ellie's to carry. Ranger nudged Ava's knee, warm eyes lifting to hers. She placed her hand over his head, steadying her breath. "How did he know?" she whispered. "How did Ranger sense she was in danger?" Luke smiled faintly. "Instinct, training, and something more. Some dogs. They feel what we can't." Ava nodded slowly. "He saved her. I owe him everything." "Not just him," Luke murmured, though he looked away before she could respond. Another officer entered, handing Luke a file. "Background check on Lauren Finch. You'll want to see page 2. Luke flipped it open. There it was. A police report from 6 years ago. Lauren's sister, age 3, lost in a river accident. The rescue attempt had failed. Witness notes described Lauren, then a teenager, screaming that she should have saved her. And in that moment, the entire story shifted. The parking lot outside Cedar Ridge Hospital was half buried in fresh snow, its street lamps casting soft yellow pools of light across the rows of quiet cars. The night was still, too still, a silence that didn't soothe, but reminded people of everything they hadn't processed, everything they kept buried. Luke stepped into the cold with Ranger trotting beside him. His breath clouded the air. Ranger stayed close, brushing gently against his leg as they crossed the lot. The dog wasn't tracking or alerting anymore. He was simply keeping watch, as if he sensed that Luke was the one who needed support now. Luke stopped beside his truck, a beat-up silver Chevy that had somehow outlasted every major storm in Colorado. He leaned against the door, lowering his head. He didn't speak, didn't move. The cold bit through his jacket, but he barely felt it. Ranger sat at his feet, waiting, patient, present. Minutes passed. Snow gathered on Luke's shoulders. Finally, he exhaled. A breath cracked from somewhere deep inside him. "I heard her today." His voice trembled. "Ellie. The way she said, 'Mommy.'" Ranger lifted his head. Luke closed his eyes. "It sounded just like Sarah. The last time I heard her voice." A long breath escaped him. Shaky, uneven. He rubbed his hands together. The same motion he'd made the night of the fire, trying to shake the memory loose. But memories didn't shake loose. They clung. They froze. They carved themselves into the quiet corners of a man's life. "I should have been there sooner," Luke murmured. "I replay that call every night. The dispatch, the smoke, the roof." He swallowed hard. "The moment I realized she wasn't going to walk out with me." Ranger nudged his leg, gentle, insistent, a reminder that he wasn't alone, even inside this shadow. Luke crouched down, resting a hand on Ranger's back. "You know, they sent me to grief counseling, trauma recovery, PTSD support." He shook his head softly. "I sat through every session, said all the right things, but nothing ever changed." Ranger leaned into him. Quiet, solid, unwavering. "Until today," Luke whispered. He glanced back at the hospital, its windows glowing softly against the night. Up there, Ellie was asleep, alive. Because Ranger refused to give up. Because Luke didn't walk away. Morning in Cedar Ridge arrived with a softness the town hadn't felt in weeks. The storm clouds had drifted east, leaving behind a sky pale as washed linen, and the snow clinging to rooftops and sidewalks finally began to give want beneath the sunlight. Meltwater trickled along the curbs, carving small, winding paths through the white. Luke stepped out of his truck, Ranger hopping down beside him. The hospital parking lot smelled faintly of thawing snow and pine trees warmed by early light. It wasn't spring yet, not even close, but something in the air hinted at change, like the first quiet chord of a song that could grow into something hopeful. Inside, the halls were calmer than they'd been in days. Nurses moved with unhurried purpose, voices softer, steps lighter. Luke walked the familiar path toward Ellie's room, Ranger trotting gently at his heel. When they reached the door, Ava stood by the window, staring at the snow melt, as though trying to understand what it meant. She turned at the sound of Ranger's claws tapping softly. "You came early," she said, offering a tired but genuine smile. Luke nodded. "Didn't sleep much." A knowing look crossed her face. "Yeah, I don't think any of us did." Ellie lay curled on her side, tucked into a nest of warm blankets, her breathing steadier than the night before. A small plush bear rested beside her head, part of the hospital's emotional recovery program. Its stitched smile looked too bright for the quiet sadness in the room, but it was a start. Ranger moved to the bedside and rested his chin on the mattress. Ellie stirred, then slowly opened her eyes. There was no fear this time, only recognition. "Doggy," she whispered, voice still raw. Ranger's tail thumped once, soft as a heartbeat. Ava brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. "He's right here, sweetheart. He's not going anywhere." Luke watched them, something easing in his chest, a pressure he'd lived with so long, he'd forgotten how heavy it was. The doctor stepped in with a tablet. "Good morning. Ellie's vitals continue to improve. She'll need ongoing family counseling and a gradual transition back to routine. But medically, she's recovering well." Ava exhaled the breath she'd been holding for days. "Thank God. And thank you. All of you." The doctor smiled. "Your insurance approved extended trauma care. She'll get the support she needs without delay." Relief washed over Ava's face, softening her exhaustion. When the doctor left, the room fell quiet again. Ellie reached out a small hand toward Luke. "You helped me," she murmured. Luke swallowed, caught off guard by the simple sincerity in her voice. "Ranger did the real work," he said gently. "I just followed him." Ellie's eyelids fluttered. Her fingers curled softly. "No," she whispered. "You found me." The Cedar Ridge Airport had always been a quiet place, tucked between the rolling foothills and the endless sweep of Colorado sky. Today, as dawn spread a soft peach glow across the runway, it felt quieter than usual, as if the world were holding its breath. The icier patches of snow finally began to fracture under the morning warmth, thin cracks spreading like delicate veins across the white surface. Luke walked along the edge of the runway, boots crunching over frozen ground. Ranger trotted at his side, nose lifted into the thin morning air, tail swaying gently. The world had settled, not in celebration, but in a gentle acceptance, the kind that follows storms rather than triumphs. It had been only a few days since Ellie was found, but something in Luke's chest felt different, less like a hollow bruise, more like a room he could finally breathe in. Recovery wasn't sudden. He knew that. It was a long journey of emotional healing, one he'd avoided for years. But now, he felt the faint beginning of it, the way people feel the first subtle warmth after winter, a reminder that no season lasts forever. He paused near an old maintenance shed, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Ranger nudged his leg gently, sensing the quiet in him. "Just thinking," Luke murmured. "Don't worry. Nothing heavy." Ranger gave a soft woof, unconvinced. Before Luke could say more, he heard the soft crunch of approaching footsteps. Ava crossed the snow carefully, Ellie bundled in her arms, wrapped in a lavender coat and a knit hat with tiny bear ears. The little girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder, still fragile, still healing, but undeniably present. Alive. "I hope we're not interrupting," Ava said, breath puffing in the cold air. "Not at all," Luke replied. Ellie stirred at the sound of Ranger's pause. Her eyes brightened, not with the carefree joy of a child before trauma, but with something soft, something brave. She stretched out her arms slightly. "Doggy." Ranger trotted forward, tail circling in a slow, happy rhythm. Ellie reached down, fingertips brushing through his fur, steadier now than they had been in the hospital. Ava let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. She insisted on coming, kept saying she wanted to see him again. Luke nodded. "He's been asking about her too." Ava smiled, gentle, grateful. "I don't know how to thank you, Luke. Not just for finding her, but for everything after. The support, the calls, the way Ranger stayed through every therapy session. All of it." "You don't have to thank me," Luke replied quietly. "She needed someone. I just listened." Ava's eyes softened. "Listening is a gift. Not many people do it anymore." A cold breeze swept across the runway, carrying the scent of melting snow and distant pine. Ellie reached toward Ranger's face. He leaned forward, nudging her palm with a gentleness that made Ava's eyes shine with emotion. "I bought new locks," Ava said suddenly. "A home camera system, child safety consultants, insurance upgrades, the whole thing." She kissed Ellie's head. "I'm not taking chances again. She's the only family I have." Luke understood that fear, loving someone so deeply that the world itself felt dangerous simply because they were in it. He'd lost that once, and the memory still carried its own quiet ache. Ranger nudged him again. Luke inhaled steadily. "You're doing the right things," he said. "But don't forget to breathe too. She's safe now." Ava nodded slowly. Then, after a moment, "Are you?" The question surprised him. It wasn't casual. It was the kind of question people asked when they truly saw you. Luke looked out across the cracked snow, breath rising into the chilled morning air. "I'm trying," he answered softly. "For the first time in a long while, I'm trying."